I'm Matt.
And I'm Nate.
And this is Not Quite Religious, a podcast where a Christian pastor and former evangelical turned atheist have conversations about faith, religion, philosophy, and life while drinking coffee.
Welcome to episode 5, where we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about Matt's conversion, what it means to be nice, and how people like to put people in boxes.
Thanks, Nate.
Yeah.
I thought I'd start us off by going into more detail about my childhood experience with religion, which for me is just my experience.
Right.
So it's normal. But I got a couple comments the last few weeks as our podcast has come out about people wanted to know, like, wait, your dad was Amish? Like, what's that about?
Yeah, so just before we get into that, I just want to give a quick shout out to the plethora of people who've given us coffee advice, and they are on the list. This week, I forget what we're drinking. It's way over there.
Oh. I don't remember.
I guess they're not a paid sponsor, so
no.
It's not a huge deal. Also, I had one person ask for my book, which, as I was proofreading it, forgot how, like, Christian the perspective was when I wrote it. So that was kind of interesting. But thanks for asking for the book, and if anyone else wants it, I have it on email ready to go now.
I haven't read it. It might be awesome. It might be terrible.
It's probably terrible. Right, so Matt's dad, Amish.
Yeah. So I grew up in Ohio. So if you grow up in Ohio, of all of the places in the world, that's where you have the best chance of being Amish.
Not Lancaster County?
Not Lancaster County. Actually, Holmes County, Ohio, has the largest concentration of Amish people in the entire world.
All right.
And I was born in the county right next to Holmes County, in the second most populous Amish collection in the state of Ohio. Anyway, so my dad was Amish. When he was a kid, he left the church. He didn't technically leave the church. When they're in the Amish community, when you're a teenager, they kind of give you a couple years to figure out what you want to do, until you get married. And then when you get married, you kind of have to make a choice. So my dad didn't officially leave. He just kind of wandered off and never came back, and ended up marrying a Catholic girl, my mother. And so I grew up with half of my family being Amish. I have somewhere around 40 cousins. I've never counted, just on my dad's side of the family. I grew up around that community, and I never thought of it as a religious community. As a kid, I just thought of it as a different culture. I thought of it as a subculture.
Now, did the Amish family, like, did you guys still visit, or was it, like, were they so strict that because your father didn't join them, you were sort of cut off? My particular family was not so strict that we were cut off. Okay.
I had friendships with my cousins. Whether or not that was okay with their local bishop, I don't know.
Yeah.
It might have been one of those things where it's like, it's family, we don't care what the bishop says. Because it was a conservative order of Amish that my dad grew up in. So, I'd go to the store and get milk with my grandma, and it would take 20 minutes. And once I got my license, I discovered that the place that we went to get milk was just around the next street over. So, but I think that's important to my story, because even though I didn't understand it as religious, I think it must have had quite the impact on my views. Amish people are very, countercultural, and for religious reasons. They come from that strand of Anabaptism that's it's very insular. They do things their way, and that's how it's done. So on one hand, it's countercultural, and then on the other hand, it's really conservative, which is an interesting dynamic, I think. And then, of course, my mother being Catholic, and these two finding each other, those are, I feel like at least within Western Christianity, those are the ends of the spectrum. right? Catholicism to all the way down to Anabaptism. So
Sure.
there's a spectrum issue there. But neither of them were practicing when I was a kid. From birth to fourth grade, neither of them were practicing either faith. My mom was like a Christmas, Easter kind of Catholic.
I mean, I'm a Christmas, Easter atheist. So.
Right. And I have a friend who might be listening who says he's a Christmas, Easter Catholic atheist. So I don't know what he means by that, but anyway, faith wasn't a big part of my, faith was in the background of my life until 10 years old, but it wasn't on the foreground. It wasn't my identity. At 10 years old, I was converted to, do I want to say Christianity? No. I went to a Baptist church and had what I can only describe as a Damascus Road experience, where the scales fell from my eyes and heaven came down and glory filled my soul and all of that kind of thing.
So just for people listening who might be unfamiliar or, the sort of experience you're describing is a story of Paul of Tarsus, who was formerly Saul, who was a persecutor of Christians according to the book of Acts, and on the way to arrest and torture a local church, Jesus shows up in a vision, blinds him, tells him, you need to start worshiping me, go find Ananias.
That's correct.
There's very much Jeopardy right there. And Ananias makes the scales fall from his eyes. Paul is now converted and becomes, the sort of star evangelist to the pagan nation of Rome, where Peter is really the Jewish evangelist and writes, however many books of the New Testament, depending on who you believe, and eventually is beheaded in Rome for his faith.
Yeah, that's a good summary of the story of Paul. So my conversion felt like that. I'm not the apostle to Rome.
Yeah, and hopefully you're not getting beheaded at any point.
Yeah, and that would be nice for my family, at least, and my friends. They probably don't want that experience. But my point is that it was dramatic, and having years to reflect on why it was dramatic. I think it has something to do with my grandmother passing away not long before I had that conversion. That was hard for me. I was really close with my grandmother, and it made me think about. I was an 8-year-old thinking about death, which I'm not the only 8-year-old in the world thinking about death, but when you're that young and you're confronted that, forcefully with it shapes you.
Yeah, well, and I think you're naturally a thinker in general. I think some people, they experience death and that was really sad, but I'm going to go about my life or pretend it didn't happen or not think too deeply. But just knowing you for years and years and years, you're a deep thinker. So. Yeah,
and I was really close with my grandmother. In fact, it was more like losing my mother than it was that's how close I was with my grandmother. So all of a sudden I was thinking, oh, we die. And what happens afterwards? Sure. And it terrified me. I didn't have anything to go on. It's not like, even though my parents were religious in background, they actually, for the first 10 years of my life, weren't religious at all. The only thing I can describe it as we were nothing. We subscribed to nothing. But of course I had
You guys were nuns before nuns were a thing.
Yeah, but of course I had the background of Catholicism and Amish in the, always there. So I'd heard about Jesus, I'd heard about heaven, I heard about hell, and after my grandma died, I was like, what if I die and go to hell? And that terrified me. And I went to this church, this Baptist church in Ohio, and they told me, you can know for sure that when you die, you won't go to hell. And this is how you know. You pray this prayer and really believe it, and then you can know 100% sure when you die that you go to heaven. And I, as a 10-year-old, was like, this is amazing. And I felt the relief of, I think that this is the best way to describe what my conversion experience actually was. I felt the relief of knowing sure that when I died, I was going to heaven because I believed fully the man who told me that, the deacon at that particular church. I believed it wholeheartedly, and I felt that relief come over me. Now, a psychologist or a therapist could work wonders with that, and that's a different episode and maybe a completely different podcast.
Unless I'm misremembering, which I apologize to, those people of faith if I am, but there's definitely, biblical precedent for like, follow me as I follow Jesus, or believe me because, Paul's Jesus he appeared to Peter and then the apostles and then the 500. And so he's not, yes, for Christianity, there is like a faith in Jesus, but I don't think, you were necessarily created an idol by believing this other person. You were following him as he follows, as Jesus. And there's like this line, ideally back to Christ himself 2,000 years ago, where people are like, no, like I follow this. And I don't know if that makes sense.
It makes sense. I think what I'm alluding to and what I'm trying to suggest is that what I believed then is different than what I believe now.
Okay.
But what I believed then shaped the entire journey. It wasn't long after that I felt that relief, probably a year after, that I started having questions that went like this. So what if I didn't mean the prayer when I prayed it? How can I... The promise to know for sure didn't stick.
Sure.
Right.
I don't think you're alone in that experience.
Yeah.
Either.
No, I don't. It was interesting, though. I put out a thing on Facebook maybe a year or two ago, and it got a lot of response. And all I was doing was sharing my experience and trying to see if others had shared that, or if I was having some sort of like unique niche, nuanced experience, or if there's this collective thing going on. And the topic was deconstruction of Christian deconstructionism or deconversion. And I asked people like if in their childhood they got the distinct impression from the churches that they went to, or from their parents, that if they didn't believe what their parents believed, or they didn't believe what their churches believed, that they would spend an eternity being lit on fire by a sovereign God. Is that like, and I couldn't have put it more clearly and put it more bluntly. And I was open to the fact that isn't how people received the teaching. And I was surprised to find out that there were people who went to the same church that I was brought up in, who said, that isn't what I heard at all.
Yeah.
And I really I don't want to unpack this in this particular podcast. We can unpack it as many episodes as we want, but all I want to say about that is...
You can do it after we do the Hebrews 6 episode.
Yeah, there's something about my experience that is unique. In that I'm the only one I know who can say my mother was Catholic, my father was Amish. Until I was 10 years old, I was raised nothing, and then one day somebody told me that I could know for sure that I go to heaven because I was scared because my grandma just died. And like that's all of those are very particular things.
Yeah.
So I'm open to the fact that other people heard other things and didn't grow up through their teen years, through their 20s, as terrified of hell as I did. What I'm saying is, if you grow up that way, it's eventually you're going to break and you're going to pop and you're going to look at the Christian faith, this thing that was so shaping to my identity. If it's built on this foundation of fear of hell, eventually it's going to pop. You're going to want some other explanation. And so, to the extent that I've deconstructed, and I actually don't consider myself a Christian who's deconstructing, but to the extent that I have deconstructed, I know